Hello, today we're going to take a first look at Forever Skies. It's a survival game that released into early access in June. I've played just over 15 hours, but also took my time and explored all the material that's in the game so far. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a good first impression of what the gameplay is like. As always, thanks go to the devs Far From Home for the review key, and as always, all opinions and footage are solely mine. The premise of the game is that a virus got loose on the world, and the air is now toxic to humans. Some people survive by going into space, and you're the latest explorer to come down and try to find out how to get rid of the virus. Essentially, the game is a sailing survival game. The sea is the atmosphere, and you can fish for food and scavenge materials floating around. You'll get access to a blimp that will be your base. So you have base construction mechanics that you can use to craft new workbenches and expand your base. You fly your blimp between towers that rise from the toxic air. They're basically the islands you'd see in a sailing survival game. The flying element is nicely done, and the particle effects give you the feeling of waves on a sea. But there's little for you to do, so it's a good thing that there's the option to just set the course and lock in your speed while you do other things like crafting. There's different types of towers, and you can find a variety of different materials and items to research. You'll need to scan and research items to make your own, so exploring is a key part of the gameplay, and you want to do that as much as possible early on. Scavenging is done with a laser on your ship, so sometimes you have to maneuver a bit to get to those little hidden bits of loot. And later on you can get a handheld scavenger, which is a bit handier but uses batteries. Most of the towers of the same type are pretty similar, but there's enough different types that exploring towers doesn't become too samey. But you do notice that most are pretty similar, and there's few unique ones at the moment. There's pretty much no risk in early access, other than falling off, though the game does require you to research new tools like knives to access some parts of these towers. You can make your base as big as you want, but the blimps can only support so much weight, so you have to upgrade it and add extra motors if you want a bigger base. One of the most important upgrades is the ability to fly higher, because the lower atmosphere is full of flying balls of plastic and metal. Running into those balls and the towers will damage your blimp, so flying higher is important to avoid running into things. But at the same time there's also storms, and if your blimp is the highest thing around, you get hit by lightning, which also does massive damage to your ship. Generally the weather isn't too hard to manage though. You just set down on a tower whenever a storm comes and you should be fine. Some towers are taller, which means that you have to have upgraded your blimp to fly that high, and eventually the story sends you to a high tower with an elevator that goes down to the toxic surface. This is basically an underwater sequence. You have an oxygen tank and a limited supply of air. You have to explore this new environment to find new items to research, and the layout of the early access area is quite mazy, so you have to spend quite a bit of time trying to find your way around. The place is dotted with oxygen generators that you can use to top up your supply if you're willing to spend batteries to power them. There's plenty of loot to be had and new materials to research, but it does become a bit onerous to have to run back for oxygen because your starting tank is pretty tiny. Luckily you can find upgrades to your oxygen tank after a bit of exploring, but the early exploration is a bit constrained by the low oxygen supply. Overall the game does make use of a lot of tech requirements to lock away different areas. You have to research knives to get through vines, better engines to fly higher, new batteries and oxygen tanks to explore further, and new viruses to get past some plants. There's no combat in early access. You do meet a hostile enemy towards the end, but you don't actually fight them. There are some hostile insects on some towers, but they don't move and you can research a crossbow to shoot them pretty easily. Generally the game doesn't give you the feeling that combat will be too important, because the animations aren't as sharp as you'd expect in a combat focused game. So the overall impression I get is that survival will be more of the centerpiece of the game. Speaking of which, you have your normal food, water and fatigue meters. You scavenge for materials to craft lures to fish with, and you can find plants in some towers. Eating raw food or water will give you a variety of sicknesses that you can cure by researching and eating different items. For example, early on you can catch an illness that makes it hurt to look at the sun. Cooking foods will generally make them safe to eat though. Once you've crafted the appliances to purify them, it's just a matter of spending some time and you'll avoid getting sick. Generally speaking, it's easy to get food and water. So far I wouldn't say that this game is focused on a hardcore survival experience. Survival is there, but the game is more focused on the exploration and narrative aspects than hardcore survival. The survival elements don't really interact much with each other or the rest of the gameplay, so there's no chance for conflicting choices for the player to make. But the game is still in very early access, so I expect gameplay to evolve as the game develops. Overall, the game is well presented and it's nice to sail your ship high up. The weather effects are nice to see, though they don't play a critical role in the gameplay. The underground areas do suffer from a heavy use of greenish tint, but that fits in with the lore, so it's to be expected. So far the game doesn't offer much in the way of challenge. As I mentioned before, the game is focused on base building and exploring rather than hardcore survival. Most of the survival mechanics are there to keep it busy, and I don't expect that any players will die too often to hunger or thirst. The early access version doesn't give much in terms of story, but expect that it will become more important as the game develops, and the game is intended to have co-op added later on. The game as it is at the moment should appeal to players who enjoy base building, and it looks like a lot of the current player base like showing off their creations. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.